What if I told you the deadliest weapons on ancient battlefields weren't steel swords or bronze spears, but, well, plants? Imagine warriors blinded by caustic sap or armies incapacitated by, hallucinogenic berries. For centuries, empires rose and fell, not just by military might, but by the forgotten power of botanical warfare. In 184 BC, the naval forces of King Eumenes II of Pergamon faced overwhelming odds against the fleet of Hannibal, the legendary Carthaginian general who'd terrorized Rome for decades. Eumenes' ships were outnumbered, his sailors less experienced. Victory seemed impossible. Then his men began hurling clay pots onto enemy decks. The pots shattered, releasing not fire or oil, but something alive. Thousands of venomous serpents. Chaos erupted. Hannibal's disciplined crews abandoned their posts, desperate to escape the writhing mass of vipers. Eumenes won decisively, not through superior tactics or courage, but through biological terror. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a vast, largely forgotten arsenal that ancient commanders wielded with devastating effectiveness. An arsenal grown in gardens, harvested from forests, extracted from roots and leaves and berries that looked innocent but killed with surgical precision. The Scythians, nomadic warriors who dominated the Eurasian steppes for centuries, dipped their arrows in a concoction so lethal that even minor wounds proved fatal. Ancient sources described their poison mixture, viper venom combined with decomposed human blood, and the toxic sap of aconitum, commonly known as wolfsbane or monkshood. Modern analysis confirms that aconitum contains alkaloids affecting the heart and nervous system, causing paralysis, cardiac arrest, and, death within hours. A Scythian archer didn't need to hit vital organs. A scratch was enough. The poison did the killing. Greek and Roman historians documented these weapons with a mixture of horror and fascination. Strabo wrote of Scythian arrows that inflicted incurable wounds. Pliny the Elder catalogued toxic plants used in warfare, noting that some were so dangerous that merely handling them required precautions. These weren't superstitions. They were practical military intelligence about weapons that worked. In ancient India, military treatises like the Arthashastra, written around 300 BC, contained detailed instructions for botanical warfare. Smoke weapons using combinations of chilies, sulfur, and toxic plant materials could clear fortifications without siege engines. Defenders would flee, choking and blinded, unable to fight. Attackers would then enter unopposed. The text also described methods for poisoning enemy water supplies using plant toxins that were tasteless and odorless but caused debilitating illness within days, weakening garrisons before assault. The genus Euphorbia, which is actually quite common across Mediterranean and African regions, produces a milky latex sap so caustic it causes severe burns and even temporary blindness on contact. Ancient African warriors coated their weapons with this sap. European armies, encountering these tactics for the very first time, were completely unprepared for the agony of wounds that continued burning long after the initial injury. The psychological impact was devastating. Soldiers became terrified of even minor wounds, knowing they might result in permanent disfigurement or, even blindness. But direct toxicity was only one application. Some plants, interestingly enough, weaponized the mind itself. During the siege of Kira, which took place around 590 BC, attackers faced a seemingly impregnable city with abundant water supplies from a protected river. Direct assault would cost thousands of lives. Instead, the besieging forces contaminated the river upstream with hellebore, a toxic plant that causes violent gastrointestinal distress, delirium, and muscle paralysis. Within days, Kira's defenders were simply too sick to fight. The city fell without a major battle. The tactic was so effective and, honestly, so horrifying to Greek sensibilities about honourable warfare that it allegedly prompted one of the first treaties restricting the use of poison in war. Datura, a genus of flowering plants containing powerful tropane alkaloids, grows wild across Asia and the Americas. Its effects include hallucinations, delirium, confusion, and, well, a complete loss of contact with reality. Ancient Indian texts describe using Datura to incapacitate guards, disrupt command structures, and create chaos in enemy camps. Just a small amount mixed into food or drink could render an entire garrison useless for days. Victims simply couldn't distinguish reality from hallucination, making coordinated defense impossible. The Dacians, who fought Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, reportedly used smoke from burning plants containing psychoactive compounds during religious ceremonies to induce trance states in warriors before battle. While the specific plants remain debated, the practice gave Dacian fighters a reputation for fearlessness that absolutely terrified Roman legionaries. Whether the psychological effect came from the plants themselves or from the ritual context doesn't really matter. The tactical advantage was real. Geography became destiny when botanical weapons entered the equation. Regions rich in toxic plants became strategic assets. The Colchis region along the Black Sea, famous for its abundance of poisonous plants, was both feared and coveted. Control of areas where aconitum, hellebore, or other potent species grew wild meant control of weapons that simply couldn't be easily replicated elsewhere. Trade routes carrying these botanical materials became targets for military interdiction. The effectiveness of botanical weapons extended well beyond direct combat, you know. Certain plant compounds could induce symptoms that resembled plague or other diseases, causing enemy forces to abandon their positions out of sheer fear of contagion. Smoke from specific plant combinations could interestingly simulate fire signals, disrupting enemy communications, and, well, irritant plants scattered along retreat paths could slow pursuing armies without the need to engage them directly. Ancient generals understood something that, frankly, modern warfare often forgets: that incapacitation can be more tactically valuable than death itself. A wounded soldier requires several healthy comrades to carry him, which consumes resources and, quite honestly, lowers morale. A garrison rendered sick from poisoned water can't fight, but also can't simply be replaced. The fortification must be completely abandoned. Botanical weapons, in this sense, achieved these effects with minimal risk to the attackers. The knowledge required to weaponize plants was, well, both sophisticated and highly specialized. It demanded an understanding of which parts of plants were most toxic, when to harvest them for maximum potency, how to preserve and concentrate their active compounds, and how to deploy them effectively under battlefield conditions. This knowledge was passed down through generations of shamans, healers, and military specialists, all of whom recognized that nature provided arsenals far more diverse than any forge could ever produce. Roman military manuals barely mention these tactics, not because they weren't used, but because, well, they were considered dishonorable, beneath the dignity of so-called civilized warfare. Yet archaeological evidence suggests Roman forces encountered botanical weapons regularly on their frontiers and on occasion even employed them themselves when conventional tactics failed. The silence in official records really reflects a discomfort with acknowledging that barbarian methods sometimes proved more effective than Roman discipline. The legacy of ancient botanical warfare actually extends directly into modern chemical and biological weapons. Mustard gas used in World War I is, in fact, a synthetic version of compounds found in plants. Nerve agents, interestingly enough, mimic the action of plant-derived toxins affecting neurotransmitters. The Geneva Protocol of 1925, prohibiting chemical and biological weapons, has its roots in ancient ethical debates about poisoning wells and using toxic plants against enemies. Today, we really do sanitize this history. We speak of ancient warfare as noble, heroes with swords, honorable combat, glory on the battlefield. But the reality was, honestly, messier and more creative. Ancient commanders used every advantage available, and plants provided advantages that bronze and iron simply couldn't match. They killed silently. They incapacitated without warning. They turned the enemy's own supplies against them. They were cheap, renewable, and honestly, devastatingly effective. The plants themselves haven't changed. Aconitum still grows in mountain meadows, its beautiful blue flowers concealing lethal alkaloids. Datura still blooms in waste places, its trumpet-shaped flowers hiding compounds that can, well, shatter sanity. Euphorbia still oozes caustic latex when broken. The knowledge of how to weaponize them has merely been forgotten by most, preserved in fragments of ancient texts and the practices of isolated cultures that never abandoned the old ways. This history matters because it reveals something essential about human ingenuity and the nature of conflict. When survival is at stake, we weaponize everything available. The distinction between tool and weapon, medicine and poison, becomes context-dependent. The same plant knowledge that heals can kill. The same botanical expertise that feeds can starve. Ancient warriors understood this duality and exploited it without hesitation. If this journey into forgotten arsenals revealed that nature's power shaped history as much as human courage or technological innovation, subscribe to Through Time. Share this with someone who needs to understand that the history of warfare is stranger and more complex than we imagine, and that the most effective weapons aren't always the most obvious. The plants are still there, waiting. The question is whether we remember what they can do.